The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the third part of SEEA's Learning Circle series, where we're going to be talking about consumer protections for inclusive financing for energy efficiency. For those of us joining for the first time, I'll remind you I'm Wesley Holmes. I'm the Director of Strategy and Development for the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance. We are a regional energy efficiency organization serving 11 states across the Southeast, from Virginia to Florida and westward to Arkansas and Louisiana. We're delivering this series in partnership with Clean Energy Works as part of our mission to expand the availability and accessibility of capital to make energy efficiency investments, which is part of our broad portfolio of projects to advance energy efficiency in the region. This session actually marks the beginning of our Learning Circle series on inclusive financing. For those of you on the call, everybody has had a chance to you've either joined the first two sessions or listened to the recordings of them to get the essential grounding in how on-bill financing works and an update on programs who have been operating in the Southeast for a while. These sessions are actually going to be more direct, kind of beyond 101 level education, where we're going to give everybody an opportunity to dive into the more thorny issues and implementation questions that folks who are actually looking to apply a program have been trying to solve. You're joined by a great audience today. We have representatives from state energy offices, utilities, energy services companies, public interest groups, consumer advocates, a broad array of professionals who have been working to advance these issues across the region, and we're very grateful to have you all with us today. As we're going through the presentation, be thinking about questions you're going to have related to consumer protections and program design, and feel free to go ahead and drop those in throughout the presentation into the questions box, and we will be moderating those questions when we get to the end of the session. We do want to have more time today to address questions, so we're going to try to get through this as much as possible and allow at least 20 to 25 minutes for Q&A with the audience. We do want this to be a constructive exchange of dialogue with the audience members to make sure you get the most value as possible. Now, we're very lucky today to be drawing on some substantial experience from around the country who've been working on these programs. Our moderator today is going to be Don Maurice Crease. You can call him Don. He's a consumer advocate for the Public Utilities Commission of New Hampshire. We'll also be joined by Mr. Harlan Lockman, who is the principal of the Energy Efficiency Institute and one of the creators of the pay-as-you-save tariff-based financing model. We'll also be joined by Mr. David Neal, a staff attorney for the Southern Environmental Law Center, as well as Dr. Holmes Hummel, founder of Clean Energy Works, has been working to mobilize more investment for the clean energy economy through inclusive financing. And so with that, I'm very pleased to turn it over to Don, who will be moderating the remainder of the panel for us, and I will be back to help us wrap up.
Thank you, Wesley, and let me just say at the outset what a great honor it is to be part of this distinguished panel talking about this important subject. Here in New Hampshire, we were the very first folks to pilot a pay-as-you-save on-bill tariff financing program way back in 2001, and so we feel deeply invested in this whole concept as a way of delivering energy efficiency value to a broad array of consumers. And I know from experience that the folks that I am talking with today are among the most knowledgeable and forceful advocates for this way of delivering energy efficiency to consumers in the country, and so you have a very distinguished group here. I listened to the first two webinars in this series, and they were both really excellent. If you happen to have not heard one or both of them, I highly recommend that you go back and take a listen and a look. Here in New Hampshire, we have a long and very good working relationship with the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships, which is the Northeastern equivalent of SEEA. And I love SEEA because I'm actually talking to you from southeastern New Hampshire, so I feel like I have a special reason to be part of this really cool effort that SEEA has undertaken. And it is so astute of folks talking about pay-as-you-save and on-bill tariff financing to focus on this question of consumer interest. That is absolutely a critical topic if these kinds of programs are to succeed. There are, depending on who you believe, either 43 or 44 states in the U.S. that have officially designated representatives of consumers who advocate and appear as parties before state utility regulators on behalf of utility customers, and they have historically been leaders in the energy efficiency space because energy efficiency is a vital tool to use in making sure that consumers maximize the value they get from the electricity grid and the natural gas distribution system. So consumer advocates have traditionally and continue to be important allies when it comes to advancing energy efficiency programs. I worry all the time as New Hampshire's ratepayer advocates about what happens to low-income customers and customers who don't own the places where they live. It is so easy for folks like that to get lost in the shuffle, and it is very easy to talk about high-tech stuff that folks who have lots of means and lots of sophistication and lots of time can easily adopt, and then leave folks who have fewer resources at their disposal without the ability to take advantage of these things. So to the extent that we place special emphasis on and give special attention to the interests of low-income customers, it makes ratepayer advocates like me very happy, and frankly it advances the public interest that is at the heart of efforts that we undertake to promote energy efficiency. And just for very practical reasons, it is extremely valuable to make sure that the the perspectives of consumer advocates are addressed in the context of these discussions, because if you don't do that, and Wesley, if you could advance to the next slide, I forgot to tell you to do that, and you can just show up all of the various bullet points there. I know from talking to consumer advocates around the country that there can often be a fair degree of skepticism about on-bill tariff financing programs for a variety of reasons among consumer advocates. So gaining their buy-in and their understanding of these things is really important to the success of these programs. So if you go to the next slide, at the first session, which again I highly recommend that you go back and listen to if you didn't, this series showed how inclusive financing through on-bill tariff financing does real stuff. It really removes barriers to energy efficiency for customers who would otherwise not have access. And the consumers we're talking about are consumers who really need the kind of deep retrofits to the premises that they live in that make for meaningful energy efficiency progress. If you go to the next bullet, most but not all of the on-bill tariff financing programs around the country have chosen to use the PAYS system for the program design that they implement. PAYS stands for Pay As You Save. It is a very specific and well-developed flavor, I guess you could say, of on-bill tariff financing. We are very fortunate to have Harlan Lockman here as one of the inventors and godfathers of the PAYS system to explain what is distinctive about PAYS, and so I urge you to pay special attention to him. The second session in this series was super valuable because all three of the participants in that discussion are folks who have real-world on-the-ground experience in delivering PAYS to customers, and I learned a lot from hearing what they have to say. If you look at the next bullet, we know that real-life results reported by utilities in multiple states around the country in a variety of situations and regions demonstrate that a majority of consumers who receive an offer to invest in energy efficiency through the PAYS program give the answer that we're looking for, which is yes. And to get to that yes, it is absolutely essential for consumer protections to be not just in place, but to be known to consumers so that they can feel comfortable with agreeing to participate in a PAYS program. And if you go to the next slide, we have 4 topics to cover today, and it is my solemn promise to you that we are going to cover the first 4 topics in the first 35 minutes or so of today's webinar so that we have plenty of time to hear or consider and answer the questions that you folks have, because that's where the best discussion happens in these webinars, and so we're really going to be very disciplined about making time for that. So we are first going to talk about what the terms of the Pay-As-You-Save program really are, and I know Harlan is going to talk about that. Then we're going to turn to Neil, to talk about the fact that the terms of these on-bill tariff financing programs are binding on Successor customers. That is a key feature of a Pay-As-You-Save program, any on-bill tariff financing program, and understanding how that works is really critical. The issue that keeps consumer advocates up at night is the next one on the bullet list. That has to do with disconnection for non-payment. And then finally, Holmes Humble is going to talk about quality assurance and measurement and verification. And without really great measurement and verification and quality assurance, ratepayer-funded energy efficiency just doesn't work. It's just critical to be able to talk to skeptical policymakers in a way that convinces them that we have the data that proves that this stuff really works. So that's a very important topic, and after we get through all that stuff, we are going to hear and answer your questions. So with that, I have the honor of introducing my friend and fellow New Englander, Harlan Lachman of the Energy Efficiency Institute. Harlan, I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank SEEA for its leadership in the field, and my friend Don Kreis for his expertise as a consumer advocate and an important counselor to public utility commissioners. I want to begin with the pays offered to customers. You can go to the next slide, that's fine. Thank you. We like to call it an offer that works because the results in multiple programs in multiple states have shown that a majority of customers receiving this offer say yes, agreeing under these terms to pay 100% of the costs for the most cost-effective energy efficiency upgrades. The pitch that we're going to show on the screen shortly appears in program marketing materials and is used by contractors, program operators, or utilities to quickly explain the benefits of participation to customers. These are the words we encourage program staff to actually say to customers. Energy-saving upgrades are installed in your building and you pay nothing up front. Your utility pays for the installation. A charge that is significantly less than the estimated savings is added to your bill. You have no loan, no lien, and no debt with this transaction, just lower bills. If an upgrade fails and is not repaired, or if you move, the program charges end as long as you have maintained the upgrades. Next slide. The pay system makes no savings guarantee. When EEI developed the Pay-As-You-Save system, we realized that there was no way to guarantee savings without caveats that make the guarantees complicated and meaningless. Actual savings that a customer will see depends a lot on how they use their space and energy-using equipment. The number of people living in a home may change. They may have purchased a new air conditioner, freezer, or dryer. They might want to take back some of the savings by increasing their comfort, using higher inside temperatures in the winter or lower temperatures during the cooling season. Equally important, savings estimating technology is never 100% accurate. The margin of error varies for each home. So savings guarantees are not realistic, and we've learned that they're not necessary. What PAYS does promise is that the estimated savings will significantly exceed the on-bill program services charges. This requires no caveats, and along with other PAYS consumer assurances, is sufficient for most customers to say yes to program offers. The 80% rule, which I'll illustrate in the next slide, means that annual estimated savings equal or exceed annual program charges by at least 25%. For most customers, these savings, combined with PAY's other consumer assurances, are sufficient reason to participate. Some utility programs make a bill-neutral offer to customers. That is, customer charges are no more than their savings. First of all, it's not a compelling offer to customers. And because of savings analysis error margins, post-upgrade savings may be less than, equal to, or greater than pre-installation bills. So bill neutral actually means that some customers will end up paying more than they save, and we think that's unacceptable. While fewer measures may qualify with the PAYS approach, many more customers participate. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is what the 80% rule looks like. Energy savings is on the vertical axis. Estimated energy savings per year is at the top. Time in years is on the horizontal axis. The estimated useful life of the upgrade is on the far right. Total savings are represented by the entire green and blue areas. 2/3 of the estimated savings, the blue area, are used to pay for the upgrades. The customers at the location get the rest of the savings, the green area, the annual net savings. They also get any additional savings for those upgrades that continue to function beyond their estimated useful life. From the customer perspective, the 80% rule means from the start, their estimated savings will exceed the cost of their charges by at least 25%. After utility cost recovery is complete and payments end, the customer at the location gets 100% of any remaining savings. PAYS is a market-driven program, so customers need a significant incentive to participate. Getting a significant portion of the savings from the start has proven to be sufficient to get more than half of customers who receive offers to say yes, and in some states significantly higher than 50% or more. From a utility's perspective, having the duration of charges limited to only 80% of the estimated useful life of the upgrade increases the likelihood that the utility will be able to recover all of the program services charges as well before the upgrades may need to be repaired or replaced. Next slide, please. Thanks. Most programs, consumer assurances, identify problems after upgrades have been installed by using on-site inspections or post-installation billing analysis. EEI has made a major effort in its designs and its system to also focus on providing consumer assurances before installations take place. Rigorous requirements for contractors help ensure that contractors who enter customers' homes will do good work they will stand behind. Requiring contractors and their crew chiefs to complete and pass, not just attend, training sessions and meet other certification requirements including bonding or irrevocable letters of credit, as well as proof of insurance from any subcontractors, and having financial penalties when a contractor's work fails inspection, protects the customer by restricting the field of contractors to those confident in their workmanship, eliminating problems before they occur. As opposed to generic product performance standards, EEI is a proponent of open competition that allows contractors and suppliers to submit bids to provide products and services to the program. Contractors or the utility can use open solicitation for bulk purchasing of specific products that best meet the participants' end uses and secure the highest quality at the lowest price. And bidding not only allows more upgrades to qualify for the tariff, but it also simplifies participation for customers, since they know they are getting high-quality upgrades at a great price without having to do the shopping themselves. If RFPs include contractor installation prices, customers do not even need bids from multiple contractors to ensure low prices for their specific projects. Finally, while binding arbitration has gotten a bad rap because of abuses by large corporations, it can be used to quickly resolve problems at little or no expense to customers by avoiding the costs and time associated with court proceedings and decisions rendered by those not familiar with tariffed on-bill programs. While binding arbitration is routinely included in the PAYS program contracts, to our knowledge, its use has never been required.
Thanks, Harlan. That was really cool and robust. Two of the take-homes that I heard from that are the importance of that 80% rule, and from the standpoint of being a consumer advocate, the fact that those kinds of consumer protections that are built into the PAYS program are vastly in excess of what a consumer would enjoy if she or he was just going out into the marketplace, say, to do conventional home renovations or projects on their own. And I think the key to making that happen is the fact that pay-as-you-save is based on a tariff, and a tariff, as I heard Holmes explain very articulately in the very first session in this series, is two things. It is a contract between a utility and its customers, and it also enjoys the force of law because utility tariffs are approved by utility regulators. So they're powerful tools, and in the context of PAYS, a key component of a PAYS program is the fact that the terms of the tariff are binding they're always binding on the utility, but they are binding not just on the customer who delivers that yes and agrees to enter into the participate in the PAYS program, but on successor customers who move into a premises after a particular customer has vacated them, leaving the PAYS measures behind. And here to talk about that is my new friend David Neal, of the Southern Environmental Law Center. So if you go to the next slide, David can take it away.
Thank you. I'm really happy to join you all, and I want to thank Harlan and EEI for pioneering the PAYS tariff, and Wesley at SEEA for his collaborative approach to this work, and of course Holmes and Clean Energy Works for tireless efforts to bring inclusive financing to utilities and those low-income customers who most need relief from high energy burdens. And Wesley, you can just go ahead and get that slide on the screen. Holmes has included some resources that I've prepared at the Southern Environmental Law Center. There are links on this slide. They all cover both the kind of basics of pay-as-you-save as well as some of the legal and policy issues that I'll talk about right now. So on the next slide, we'll jump right in. First, tariffed on-bill financing programs are subject to the same rules as any other utility tariff. Those rules are fairly consistent across jurisdictions and are probably familiar to you all. Tariffs must be just and reasonable and cannot be unreasonably discriminatory. These criteria apply whether a utility is regulated by a state utility commission or an elected board in the case of some electric membership cooperatives. A PAYS tariff is reasonable and does not result in undue discrimination. All tariffs are designed to allow the utility to recover its costs for providing service to ratepayers. The costs for upgrades are paid by those who most directly benefit. So PAYS doesn't raise any fears of cross-subsidization. Those tariffs are designed to result in lower bills for those customers, and the estimated savings, as Harlan just pointed out, exceed the tariff cost recovery charge. I'd note as well that PAYS is not unique in the way that a subsequent customer might be subject to a tariff that was initiated by a previous customer at that location. So consider a utility customer who installs rooftop solar that is interconnected to the grid and subject to a net metering tariff. That subsequent customer who moves into that house or buys that house would likewise be subject to a net metering tariff, even though he or she did not initiate the installation or interconnection of that solar PV system. We can go to the next slide. In both instances, the underlying rates charged to those customers doesn't necessarily change, but the tariff reflects the individual circumstances resulting from the behind-the-meter investments at the customer's location. So, Wesley can go ahead and advance, I think. In almost every state where a pays tariff has been considered, questions have been raised about binding successor customers to the tariff at locations where upgrades were installed. Some of those considerations involved an assessment of whether successor customers would be better off than if the upgrades were not installed at that location. Since successor customers are only charged if they removed or damaged the upgrades before the utility recovered its costs, or if the upgrades continue to provide savings. The charges have been viewed as reasonable by regulators. And again, as this first bullet points out, commissions in 5 states have allowed utilities to adopt the pays tariff and to recover costs for investments in energy efficiency at a metered location, just as they can recover costs for other investments that are integral to the provision of electric service. Because there is no assignment of debt to a customer in a tariffed on-bill program, there is no transfer from one customer to another. Instead, the terms of the tariff apply to the meter until all costs are recovered, and tariff charges survive foreclosure proceedings, changes in tenancy, and periods of vacancy. Again, in the case of a rural electric cooperative, members accept service subject to the terms and conditions of membership. And those would be spelled out in the pays tariff. By the same token, customers of regulated utilities accept service subject to commission-approved tariffs. Finally, I'll note that under the pays system, building owners must disclose the existence of the tariffed cost recovery charge at the metered location to any prospective purchaser or tenant, and that notice requirement helps to retain the voluntary nature of the tariff, even for a subsequent resident. I guess we'll go to the next slide and talk about disconnection. Again, commissions in those 5 states have agreed that tariffed on-bill investments are essential utility services and that participation benefits customers. Just like all other essential utility services, the utility's existing rules for disconnection would apply to the initial and successor customers at a location in which upgrades have been installed through a tariffed on-bill program. But it's important to note that none of the utilities offering a tariffed on-bill program have reported exercising disconnection due to non-payment from a program participant. Again, as we've already discussed, a member or a customer's bills are likely to be lower following pays measures being installed and should be in a better position to pay their bills than they were before. I would just note that in one of the memos that was linked to at the beginning of this part of the presentation, there's some language quoted from some of those utilities commission's orders, finding that the pays tariff is integral to and interlocked with the provision of electric service, essentially meaning it's not an ancillary service. It's not just some extra service that the utility shouldn't be allowed to have disconnection authority for. And as I'm sure Harlan could point out in more detail, having disconnection authority, though, is important for keeping the costs of capital low for the utility, which helps keep overall costs for the program low. And I think that wraps up my part of the presentation.
Super. Thank you, David. It might be useful if I just take a second here to remind everybody that as questions occur to you about what you're hearing during this webinar, please write them down and post them in the questions section of the webinar control panel, and in a few minutes we'll start taking those questions, and there's no reason to withhold them while you're thinking of them, so please do that. I have been working in the energy efficiency space and with PAYS programs dating back to 2001, and I can tell you that the issues of quality assurance and measurement and verification are critical to the success of these programs. They're critical because they are what deliver the kind of consumer confidence that are essential to the success of these programs, and frankly, I can tell you from experience, they are what allow these programs to survive when they are subjected to skeptical scrutiny at the State House. We hear plenty of that here in New Hampshire, and it is great to be able to produce real data that suggests and demonstrates that this stuff really works for real people. And I have the great honor now of introducing my friend Holmes Hummel to explain how all of that works in this context.
Holmes, I think you're muted.
Maybe while Holmes is muted, I can actually ask a question, and I think my question is for David. I'm really one of the aspects of this that concerns me as a consumer advocate has to do with these successor customers who come in as a new tenant or a new owner of a property on which there are PAYS measures, in which there is a PAYS repayment obligation that runs with the meter. And you mentioned that the building owner is obliged to notify the new tenant or the new owner. Where is the source of that obligation? I know our Public Utilities Commission here in New Hampshire doesn't have plenary authority to order landlords and sellers of real estate and real estate agents to do stuff. So how do we know that that obligation is enforceable?
That's a great question. I'll give an example from Roanoke's upgrade to SAVE, which has adopted the PAYS system. And there, when in the contract for initiating the program, the owner, again, who may not be the resident, because it could be a renter who's initiated, but the owner signs a contract with the utility. And one of the terms of that contract is providing notice to any subsequent renters or prospective purchasers. Other jurisdictions have required, the utility has required other forms of notice to further guarantee that any prospective purchaser would be on notice of the cost recovery charge at that location.
That's helpful. I think we managed to figure out how to unmute Holmes. Holmes, you there?
It's true. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for your patience, and I want to credit our master of technology, Wesley Holmes, for hosting all these sessions and for making sure that inept presenters like myself can chime in at the right cue. And I want to thank all of the folks that I'm following and hasten to the close this formal presentation so that we can engage everyone who's turned their attention this afternoon to the topic. So like on Crease, I want to encourage use of the question box to make the most of that time and the access. So the last section here is taking us beyond all of the premeditated protections that go into the design of a tariffed on-bill program to offer inclusive financing to utility customers before the program even begins. Then as the program is underway, there are important consumer protections that are also embedded in the way that it is implemented. And utilities will fare better or worse in their results depending on the extent to which they're able to invest themselves in these types of best practices. So you'll see here that there are, Wesley, if you advance the slide one the very first element of the consumer protection for the results is to have qualified people involved in assessing the opportunity for investment and implementing the upgrades that are deemed to be cost effective by the results of that analysis. Imagine what would happen if you had exquisite analytics that allowed you to identify energy efficiency opportunities only to have people who are confused or ill-equipped to convert on those opportunities because of lack of access to training or experience. And I want to distinguish between those two because while there are
Just 1 second, folks. Holmes's line dropped. We're going to work to get her back on here in just a second.
Actually, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Good gracious. Let me soldier on, if I may. The elements of consumer protection that occur after the installations include making sure that someone is checking that the installations are actually made. And while it could seem expensive and over the top to send someone out to every site, modern day technology allows even the consumers themselves to use resources that are available to them to send photos into the utility or have someone who's in the customer service department swing by to a sample set of houses and to assess that the job has been completed properly. There's a certain sample set that can be subjected to more rigorous quality inspection, and the feedback that goes back to the contractors there serves to improve the quality of the work that is offered to all the customers that they work with in the program. The long-term quality of the work is tested over time, and some of that, of course, is related to the quality of the installation, and some of it's related to the quality of the products. Both of them have risks that can be mitigated with warranties that come with the contractor's work, warranty on the workmanship, or warranty on the products, and utilities that motivate their contractors to work with mechanical equipment that comes with long-lived warranties, or can be accompanied with service agreements for maintenance that extend those warranties, reduce the risk exposure for the consumer that something will go wrong, as well as the utility, which is, of course, the entity that's made the upfront investment is still recovering their cost. All along the way, it's the customer's opportunity to deliver feedback to the program operators that allow the program operators to optimize the program to protect the consumer's interests. Now, there is a long-run measure of the quality of the program that is typically articulated as measurement and verification. So imagining that the utility has implemented an inclusive financing program that has these best practice characteristics, they still want to see, did we get what we paid for? Did our investment yield the returns that we expected? Let's, if you advance this to the next slide, I think, hang on 1 second. What I would like to speak to next is the Department of Energy's efforts to establish best practices for measurement and verification using least cost standards of practice that save money for the implementers and the utility while still yielding excellent results. These protocols, the Uniform Method Protocols that were developed in the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office of the Department of Energy, are a product of extensive work that included stakeholder participation and comment, and those stakeholders actually collectively at the time represented 2/3 of the energy efficiency industry in the United States. If you were to visit the energy.gov site for uniform method protocols, you will find that there is a list of more than a dozen of these best practices, and the best practices that are shown include one called the whole building retrofit with consumption data analysis and evaluation protocol. What that means in a de-jargoned way is that the utility is able to use the bill data for the building to assess the performance of all of the upgrades that went into it, capturing the full balance of their integrated effects, rather than trying to add up individual effects of individual upgrades that have individual deemed savings amounts. This is really different than a deemed savings approach. It's important to flag that. Let me proceed to the last item here, because you'll find if you click on that link, it will send you to a document that describes the recipe for whole building retrofits with consumption data analysis, the evaluation protocol that is offered there. The fine print of that protocol tell you that the best practices they are recommending are in fact widely accepted industry standards, and they result in low cost measurement and verification that also reduces the cost of the program. That's the contribution I wanted to make to this session on consumer protection, and I'm pleased that we'll now be able to turn to questions and answers. I think I'm going to have to ask Wesley and Don to check the questions box, since I needed to call back in during the portion of my most recent remarks.
Thank you, Holmes, and I am looking at the question box, and let me just encourage all of you who are with us to send in your questions about pay-as-you-save, and with a particular focus on the consumer protection aspects of the program. I know from having talked to lots of consumer advocates around the country that there's a fair degree of skepticism about pay-as-you-save and on-bill tariff financing, and I'm personally eager to dispel that skepticism, and the best way to do that is to have a forthright conversations about the components of the program and how the interests of consumers can be protected. We got a really good question, and it has to do with the fact that the performance of energy efficiency measures and the amount that people save by implementing them varies by season. Obviously, during the times of the year when energy use is high, there's a higher degree of savings, and the times of the year when energy use is lower, there's less savings. And so the question is, how have the investor-owned utilities and the co-ops that have implemented PAYS programs dealt with this seasonality, and what do they say to customers with PAYS repayment obligations during those times of the year when their bill doesn't seem to reflect any savings? I think that's a good question for Harlan. What do you have to say about that?
Well, first of all, I would say you have to be careful about a one-size-fits-all response, because one of the benefits of the pay-as-you-save system is that for customers who are eligible for low-income fuel assistance, they can use fuel assistance funds, if available, to pay their PAYS charges, since it's an essential charge. But for all other customers, we have talked with utilities who offer budget plans to recommend those to customers worried about the seasonality. Although the measures perform better, obviously, in the coldest times and the hottest times, the bills will be higher, and so some customers like the fact that the PAYS charge levelizes their bills by itself, in that they're paying the charge year-round as opposed to seasonally. But other customers have tried and used budget plans.
This, I think, might be a question for David. One of our listeners asks, what protections would need to be built into an on-bill repayment program to be as protective of consumers as possible within the limitations of that program design?
Well, I'm not sure that I know that I have any other insight to offer that maybe that Harlan or Holmes could chime in, because again, as discussed on the call, the PAYS program has built-in customer protections already, so I'm not sure what additional protections let's say, a regulatory body or a utility might consider?
I can
I think
answer that.
Yes, Harlan.
If you'd like.
Sure.
So we didn't talk about this during my session, and I apologize. But just because I listed some consumer assurances doesn't mean there aren't more that can be offered. And built into every PAYS agreement that gets signed, I think they're now called efficiency upgrade agreements, we build in the normal consumer protections that are not required because it's not a loan or a financing instrument, but we have 3-day right of recession, which is clearly a standard. Even though there's not technically an interest payment with a tariff charge. I mean, a tariff charge is just either a flat fee or a volumetric charge. In the contracts that we have given to utilities that have implemented our system, there's the ability to say to the customer, this is the cost that's applied to the project, and this is the additional cost that we're, typically might be called financing costs. And so we're declaring all the same things that typical consumer programs, financing programs would require. So there are things that can be added. I think the balancing act, and the one that we have used, is does providing the information mislead the customer by making it more complicated than it needs to be, or is it supportive of making, a full disclosure of what's going on? And if someone has a question and they let David know or SEA know, we can talk to somebody about the specific concern they have.
I think that's a really excellent answer, Harlan. I think it's important for folks to keep in mind that because this is an on-bill tariff financing program, all of the consumer protections that apply to all customer transactions between a customer and a utility apply. And I know here in New Hampshire there are times of the year when disconnection is completely out of bounds because it's just too dang cold here in New Hampshire to disconnect anybody, and there are lots of limitations on what utilities can do to customers who are in in a, let's just say, a stressed relationship with their utilities for whatever reason. Here's another question, and I'm just sort of, please forgive me, I'm kind of reading this in real time on a very small pane on my career. This question is meant to put the emphasis on-bill repayment programs where a third-party lender is involved and a loan is attached to the customer. And I'm just trying to see what that, I don't see what the rest of that customer is. I guess that,
yeah, John, I think that the question is in reference actually to the earlier one that was asked regarding what protections need to be built into on-bill repayment. Around the South, we've seen, a prevalence of people pursuing a third-party relationship with a lender, and so a repayment model as opposed to a tariff model attached to the meter. They have to go through a third-party capital provider, a bank traditionally. And so I think the question is, for the utilities that are pursued that option, what are the kind of minimum protections they need to put in place so that those programs, to the degree possible, can be as secure as a tariff-based model?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that might go to the inherent advantages of a PAYS program as opposed to doing business with a third-party lender. We do a lot of third-party, our utilities are doing a lot of work with third-party lenders, and that has an important place in our energy efficiency programs. But the great thing about pay-as-you-save is that there is no third party involved. It is a relationship, or at least there's no third party involved in the financing aspect of it. So your relationship is directly with your utility as a customer. You aren't entering into a loan transaction. You are entering into a customer-based transaction with the utility.
I'd just add that I think you're right on, and that there are a whole host of federal and state laws regulating financing, the extension of loan products or financing arrangements. And since the utility typical utility is not in the business of being a bank or operating as a lending institution, it's certainly the advantages of the pay-as-you-save approach of going to a tariff and is as Don just suggested, that it's working with what the utility is already, the tools that the utility is already familiar with.
One of the questioners asked who the consumer advocate is in California, and rather than answer that question with regard to all the specific states, I would just invite folks to check on the website of our national organization, the National Association of State Utility Consumer Advocates, which is also called NASUCA. So if you go on the web at nasuca.org, they have links there to all of the members of our national association, and I think all of my fellow consumer advocates belong to NASUCA, and you can look there for how each of our offices work. We're all constituted slightly differently, and I believe that the Ratepayer Advocate in New Hampshire is actually a private organization called the Utility Reform Network, TURN. Anyway, I think those are all the questions that I have seen in our little question pane. So it might be time for me to turn this back over to Wesley to wrap up.
Yeah, thank you, Don. I actually had one question myself. I was curious, as people talk about, one of the common questions that come up from utilities is regarding transfer of property and what happens through that process. And you all already covered pretty well what the tariff authority allows in terms of transferability. But I was wondering if you could talk about either best practices or the importance of working with your local real estate community, and how important is it to engage with them around how they explain that to potential buyers and how they kind of tee that up to avoid any sudden surprises for the new homeowner that this is there, and how is that communicated?
Should I fill the silence, or someone else want to take this?
Harlan, you should fill the silence.
So this, funny whoever asked that, funny you should ask Wesley, because it has come into play in California. What's been clear, at least in that fair state, that the real estate community does not like anything that interferes with the sale of a property. And so the contractual obligation that David mentioned can allow this whole disclosure process to be separate from the real estate process, which simplify matters for the real estate brokers who are involved. I would like to elaborate on what David said, and that the agreement that we recommend not only says that the building owner must notify, but that there are consequences, and in that agreement the building owner agrees, in order to have the upgrades made in their property, that they will be liable for the failure to disclose, which could be very helpful in the terms of a binding arbitration settlement and recovering costs from the failed owner, let's say, the owner who failed to disclose. But it is complicated when one puts a property notice, which a few utilities have tried, and it tends to hurt the participant, the original participant, because sometimes they're forced to pay off the charge, and it has not proved necessary in most cases. The best practices that we recommend are putting stickers like on electric service, making sure that the customers who come to a utility to request service in person get information on right away, that the billing and information services people need to be able to access a location with a PAYS installation on it. But it's a good question, and what we found is that it's very hard to get real estate brokers to give up even more of their time to attend a training session, and their first reaction is, if this is different, we don't like it. So if we can keep it out of their court, it's probably for the best.
That's a phenomenon that I've seen in general with regard to the real estate community. Basically anything that interrupts the smooth progress towards efficient closure of real estate transactions is something that folks in the real estate community have a natural resistance to. It's pretty understandable, and I think as time goes by, I hope lots of realtors and real estate agents generally come to understand that energy efficiency measures are a powerful inducement to making properties more desirable. So hopefully that will change with time.
And Tom, we should mention that there was actually one of our attendees shared with us. For those of you who have access to the INRECA's, National Rural Electric Co-op Association's newsletter, recently featured one of the most successful on-bill programs in the region, the Kentucky HouseMart program, operated by Maysaid. And they actually highlighted in that article a real estate developer who was actually a very vocal proponent and champion for on-bill financing. So it would appear that that messaging is catching on, and some folks are starting to see the value. So that's a good sign. Especially since any subsequent occupants of the house will have fewer billing cycles until the entire upgrades are, all the costs are recovered for the upgrades.
So Wesley, now I think it's time to wrap up so we can get everybody back to their regularly scheduled activities inside of an hour.
I agree, and thank you for that. So I will just close with a thank you to all of our presenters. We really appreciate you dedicating your very valuable time and considerable experience on these programs to our audience. It's been a tremendous education for me, and I'm sure everybody who has attended. For folks on the line, just to let you know, our next session in the Learning Circle series will take place next month, Thursday, April 20th from 2 to 3, where we're going to be talking about the decision tool for utility managers, which covers key considerations before investing in resource efficiency and rooftop solar through a tariffed on-bill financing program. For those of you who have already received the kind of the flyer that highlights the series and what it's about, and embedded within that are links to sign up to receive the monthly invitations to join the webinar series. Feel free to share that with your colleagues you think would benefit from this, and if anybody needs another copy of that, my email address is embedded here in the slide. You're welcome to email me, and I'm happy to send that out to you or to your colleagues if you want to link them in the email. So thank you all again for joining. Thank you again to our presenters, and with that we will adjourn and wish you a good day.